Welcome to the Unveiled Epic channel. Today, we're diving deep into an unexplored historical mystery. As the golden hues of a setting sun filter through the arched windows of ancient lecture halls in the waning days of the 19th century, we find ourselves transported to a time when ideas were as vast and untamed as the American frontier, an era where the mind's uncharted territories beckoned like whispers from forgotten canyons. And at the heart of this intellectual wilderness stands William James, a man whose thoughts wove through the fabric of philosophy, psychology, and the soul's deepest yearnings. Not merely as a scholar, but as a quiet explorer of truths long buried beneath the surface of everyday existence, truths that echo from ancient epics where mystics and sages first pondered the practical magic of belief and experience. Picture the scene unfolding like a gentle river meandering through autumn woods, the rustle of yellowed pages turning in a dimly lit study, ink-stained fingers pausing over words that would redefine how we understand reality itself. For James was no ordinary thinker, born in 1842 into a family of intellectual giants, his father Henry James. A theologian whose radical ideas on spirituality set the stage for young William's lifelong quest, a quest that began not in grand revelations, but in the subtle, hidden struggles of his own health, plagued by ailments that confined him to bed yet freed his mind to wander paths unseen. Paths that led him to Europe, where he encountered the ghosts of old-world philosophies, mingling with the likes of and the emerging science of the psyche, only to return to America with a fire kindled in his spirit. A fire that would illuminate the pragmatism he championed, arguing that truth isn't some abstract eternal form handed down from Plato's cave, but something forged in the crucible of lived consequences, tested by what works in the rough and tumble of daily life, much like the pioneers who crossed the Rockies not for ideals, but for the gold that sustained them. Yet beneath this well-trodden narrative lies a veiled layer, a mystery whispered in the margins of his unpublished letters, discovered only recently in a dusty attic trunk in Cambridge, Massachusetts, letters hinting at a secret journey James undertook in 1878. Not to the familiar halls of academia, but to the shadowed ruins of ancient Mesa Verde in the American Southwest, where the Anasazi people had etched their enigmatic cliff dwellings into red rock centuries before. Dwellings abandoned in haste around 1300 AD, leaving behind petroglyphs that depicted not just hunts and harvests, but swirling patterns of thought, streams of symbols that James believed mirrored the fluid continuity of human consciousness. A discovery he kept hidden for fear of ridicule from his peers, who saw psychology as a nascent science, not a bridge to prehistoric enigmas. As our story flows onward like a tranquil stream under starlit skies, we delve into this concealed expedition, imagining James riding horseback through sagebrush plains, the wind carrying scents of pinon pine and earth, his notebook clutched tightly as he descended into the kivas, those subterranean chambers where ancient rituals unfolded. And there, amid the flickering light of a lantern, he uncovered a clay tablet inscribed with markings that predated known languages. Markings that spoke of a flowing mind river, a concept eerily akin to his later theory of the stream of consciousness, where thoughts aren't discrete beads on a string but a ceaseless current, eddying with sensations, emotions, and memories, blending past and present in an unbroken cascade. And in that moment of revelation, James felt a shiver of connection to those long-vanished souls, wondering if pragmatism wasn't born in his lectures but reborn from these forgotten truths. Truths that challenged the rigid doctrines of his time, suggesting that the human mind has always been pragmatic, adapting beliefs to survive the mysteries of existence, from the Anasazi's harmonious dances with nature to the settler's manifest destiny. But the mystery deepens as we follow the threads of James's life, weaving through his appointment as first psychology professor in 1875, where in quiet laboratories amid the hum of gas lamps and the scratch of quills, he experimented not just with perception but with the inner worlds of his students, one of whom, a fictional yet plausible character named Elias, a young archaeologist with a penchant for the occult, became James's confidant. Sharing tales of his own digs in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, where he unearthed papyrus scrolls from the Ptolemaic era that described mystical experiences akin to religious ecstasies. visions that transcended dogma and rooted in personal encounter, scrolls that James pored over in secret midnight sessions. Their discussions laced with rising tension as revealed a hidden society, the echoes of eternity, a clandestine group tracing back to ancient Alexandria. Guardians of knowledge that linked pragmatic thought to the mysteries of Greece, where initiates experienced divine truths through practical rituals, not mere words, and James, ever the empiricist, grappled with the temptation to join, his letters confessing an inner conflict, a plot twist unfolding as he discovered its ulterior motive, to use James's influence to decode a forbidden artifact, a crystal amulet said to induce streams of prophetic consciousness, buried with the Anasazi tablet. An amulet that promised to reveal forgotten truths, but at the risk of unraveling the mind. As the narrative currents swirl with gentle intrigue, we sense the building suspense in James's Cambridge home, where late-night visitors from the society knocked softly, their cloaked figures casting long shadows on snow-dusted streets, pressing him to partake in a ritual echoing ancient ceremonies, one that involved meditative immersion in sensory deprivation, mirroring his psychological experiments, but infused with mystical elements from Babylonian lore, where priests divined truths through the practical outcomes of dreams, and James, torn between scholarly caution and the allure of discovery, ventured into this hidden world, experiencing a vision that blurred the lines between psychology and spirituality, seeing his stream of consciousness merge with collective echoes from antiquity, revealing that pragmatism was no modern invention but a timeless thread, woven by shamans in Paleolithic caves who tested beliefs against survival's harsh realities. A revelation that climaxed in a stormy night confrontation when betrayed him, attempting to seize the amulet for personal power, forcing James to destroy it in a hearth's flames, preserving the mystery as a personal truth rather than a public spectacle, thus safeguarding the delicate balance between science and the sacred. In the soothing aftermath, as embers died and dawn crept over Boston's spires, James channeled this ordeal into his seminal works, first The Principles of Psychology in 1890, where the stream of consciousness flowed onto pages like a serene river reflecting eternal skies, then into Pragmatism's full bloom with lectures that argued for truths by their fruits, subtly nodding to ancient harvests of wisdom, and finally, in 1902's The Varieties of Religious Experience, where he elevated personal encounters over institutional creeds, drawing unknowingly from those veiled visions, portraying religion as a pragmatic force in human life, a source of vitality tested by its effects on the soul, influencing generations from John Dewey's educational reforms to modern mindfulness practices, his ideas rippling outward like pebbles in a pond, touching the unexplored corners of American thought, where mystery and discovery entwine in the quiet pursuit of meaning. And as our tale winds toward its tranquil close, we reflect on James's legacy, a beacon in the twilight of forgotten epics, reminding us that beneath history's surface lie hidden stories waiting to be unearthed. Stories that connect us to ancient whispers, inviting us to drift into contemplation and rest, secure in the knowledge that truth, like sleep, comes through gentle surrender to experience. As the embers of that fateful night faded into memory, William James found himself drawn back to the quiet sanctity of his study, where the weight of ancient secrets pressed upon him like the gentle fall of autumn leaves. Yet his mind, ever the pragmatist, sought to integrate these hidden revelations into the tapestry of his scholarly pursuits, turning what could have been a shattering betrayal into a wellspring of deeper insight. For in the aftermath of destroying the amulet, fragments of its crystalline surface had embedded themselves in his palm, not as wounds but as subtle reminders, glowing faintly under moonlight and whispering forgotten incantations from Sumerian epics, when philosophers first questioned the utility of gods, incantations that James transcribed in a private journal, one that would remain sealed until long after his passing, discovered only in the 20th century by a curious descendant rummaging through family heirlooms in a New York attic, revealing how these prehistoric echoes shaped his evolving views on the psyche. Imagine the scene unfolding in soft, sepia-toned hues, the tick of a grandfather clock marking time's inexorable flow, much like the stream of consciousness he so eloquently described, where thoughts meander without dams or diversions, carrying sediments of experience from distant shores, and in those post-midnight hours, James revisited his notes from Mesa Verde, sketching connections between the Anasazi's symbolic rivers and the Nile's ancient floods. Where Egyptian priests had pragmatically tested omens against the harvest's yield, a hidden historical thread that wove through Heraclitus's flux in ancient Greece, where no one steps in the same river twice, mirroring James's belief that truth evolves with circumstance, not fixed like the stars, but fluid as the Mississippi carving its path through American heartlands. Yet the mystery refused to rest, for Elias, though thwarted, vanished into the shadows of Boston's underbelly, rumored to have fled westward with remnants of the society's lore, establishing a covert outpost in the fog-shrouded forests of the Pacific Northwest, where Native American tribes like the Haida preserved oral traditions of mind-stream visions induced by totem rituals, traditions that sought to exploit, sending cryptic telegrams back to James. Laced with veiled threats and invitations to reconcile, each one building a subtle tension, like storm clouds gathering over the Charles River, compelling James to embark on another clandestine journey in 1885, this time by rail across the continent, the rhythmic clack of wheels lulling him into reflective reverie, where he pondered the pragmatic value of forgiveness versus justice, drawing parallels to forgotten Aztec codices that depicted consciousness as a serpent uncoiling through time. A serpent whose bite could heal or harm, depending on the intent behind the ritual. As the train sliced through prairies golden under harvest moons, James encountered a fellow traveler, an enigmatic woman named, a fictional composite inspired by the era's unsung female intellectuals, a linguist who had deciphered lost Mayan glyphs in the jungles, glyphs that illustrated religious experiences as personal trials, not communal doctrines, echoing James's later writings, and in whispered conversations amid the sway of the carriage, she revealed her own hidden discovery. A jade tablet from a submerged temple, inscribed with prophecies of mental unity, where individual streams merged into a collective ocean, a concept that twisted the plot further when confessed her ties to the echoes of eternity, not as an adversary, but as a reformer seeking to expose corruption, drawing James into a web of alliance fraught with doubt. For could he trust this stranger whose eyes held the depth of ancient? Or was this another layer of deception spun from the society's archaic looms? The tension rose like the Rockies looming ahead, as they disembarked in Denver and ventured into the wilderness on horseback, following trails etched by fur trappers and indigenous guides, the air crisp with pine and promise until they reached Slair, a log cabin nestled in a glen where totem poles stood sentinel, carved with faces that seemed to watch their approach. And there, in a climax shrouded in mist and moonlight, James confronted his former. The amulet's power reconstructed in a makeshift forge from native ores, pulsing with an otherworldly light that induced visions of primordial truths from the dawn of humanity when cave dwellers in Lascaux painted their inner streams on walls, testing artistic expressions against communal survival, a revelation that forced James to choose between destruction and understanding, ultimately shattering the artifact once more. But not before glimpsing a unified field of consciousness linking all eras, a glimpse that infused his psychology with a mystical undercurrent, subtly influencing his lectures back at, where students sensed an unspoken depth, a forgotten truth resurfacing like Atlantis from the depths. In the serene resolution, as James and parted ways, she to continue her linguistic quests in distant lands, he to pen his masterpieces, the experience his pragmatism, proving that ideas like ancient artifacts gain value through their application in life's trials, rippling outward to shape modern therapy, existential philosophy, and even quantum thought, where observation alters reality, much as James's personal encounters altered his doctrines, leaving us to ponder. In this calming drift toward slumber, how our own hidden histories might flow into tomorrow's discoveries, connecting us eternally to the unveiled echoes of the past. As the echoes of that Pacific Northwest confrontation faded into the misty horizons of memory, William James returned eastward by train, the vast American landscapes unfolding like pages from an ancient, unbound tome, each prairie and mountain ridge whispering secrets of resilience forged through practical trials, much like the pragmatism he refined in quiet reflection during those long hours. his hand still bearing faint scars from the shattered amulet. Scars that tingled under the influence of moonlight as if channeling residual energies from prehistoric rituals, energies that compelled him to revisit his private journals, where he had chronicled not just philosophical musings but personal torments, the lesser-known battles with chronic ailments that had shadowed his life since youth, eye strains and back pains that confined him to bed, yet expanded his inner world. A world where depression's dark currents nearly drowned him in suicidal ideation during his medical studies, only to be navigated through a pivotal encounter with the writings of Charles in 1870, whose ideas on free will became the rudder steering him toward affirming his own volition as his first act of freedom, a hidden truth that infused his psychology with an undercurrent of hope, proving that even the mind's deepest abysses could yield pragmatic fruits if one chose to believe in their navigability. Yet the mystery persisted, for upon his arrival back in Cambridge, a cryptic parcel awaited him at its gates, wrapped in weathered parchment and sealed with a wax emblem resembling the Theosophical Society's serpent-entwined cross, a society he had quietly joined in 1882 amid his burgeoning interest in esoteric traditions that linked modern thought to ancient Eastern wisdoms, and inside the parcel lay a fragment of peyote cactus, harvested from the arid mesas of the Southwest, accompanied by an unsigned note invoking the Anasazis' visionary practices, hinting at a forgotten brotherhood that guarded psychoactive sacraments as keys to unlocking the stream of consciousness. Sacraments that James, ever the empirical explorer, decided to test in the seclusion of his study one stormy evening in 1896, ingesting the bitter plant under the glow of a single candle. His pulse quickening as visions unfolded like a river swelling in spring thaw, revealing not mere hallucinations, but profound connections to ancient shamans who had used similar rites to test beliefs against survival's outcomes, their pragmatic mysticism mirroring his own philosophy, where truth emerged from experiential consequences rather than dogmatic assertions, a revelation laced with rising tension as the visions twisted into encounters with spectral figures from his past, including his deceased son Herman, whose 1884 passing had driven James to with the medium Piper, a woman whose uncanny insights he initially attributed to supernatural forces, but later rationalized as telepathic echoes or subtle cues from servants' gossip. Yet in this peyote-induced state, the boundaries blurred anew, presenting a plot twist where Piper herself appeared in ethereal form, whispering of a hidden network within the American Society for Psychical Research, which James had helped found, a network concealing artifacts from Egyptian tombs that amplified religious experiences, artifacts smuggled by none other than Elias's reformed allies, now seeking James's aid to decode them without falling into corrupt hands. As the narrative flows onward through the gentle veils of introspection, we sense the building intrigue in James's subsequent journeys, first to New York where he met with theosophical leaders under the cover of night, their discussions weaving Swedenborgian influences from his father's theology into his radical empiricism, positing that consciousness extended beyond the physical, a forgotten connection to visions of soul-spirit dualism, and then southward to the Amazon's remnants in his mind. Recalling his ill-fated 1865 expedition where seasickness and smallpox had tested his endurance, much like the pragmatic trials he advocated, only now reimagined as a deliberate initiation by unseen guides who had planted clues in the jungle's flora, leading to a rediscovered vial of amyl nitrite he had experimented with in 1875, a gas that induced metaphysical illuminations akin to nitrous oxide's revelations, where he claimed to grasp dialectics despite his anti-Hegelian stance, a personal mystery that climaxed in a clandestine gathering at a Boston estate in 1900, where James returned from her Mayan quests with jade glyphs depicting emotion as bodily responses, echoing his James theory, and a cadre of psychical researchers confronted a shadowy antagonist, a fictional descendant of ancient alchemists who sought to weaponize these altered states for control, forcing James into a ritualistic debate where philosophies clashed like thunder, his insistence on pluralism over monism shattering the antagonist's monistic illusions, preserving the delicate balance of personal spiritual experience as outlined in his forthcoming Varieties of Religious Experience, where religious genius triumphed through pragmatic vitality rather than institutional chains. In the tranquil resolution, as dawn broke over the estate's gardens, James emerged with renewed vigor, his cardiac pains momentarily eased by the catharsis, channeling these veiled adventures into his lectures on pluralism in a pluralistic universe, subtly nodding to the interconnected streams of human thought across epochs, from Paleolithic cave rituals to modern psychology, influencing figures like John Dewey and even quantum thinkers who saw observation shaping reality. Much as James's hidden explorations shaped his legacy, a legacy that invites us to drift into peaceful contemplation, embracing the mysteries that bind our inner worlds to the vast, unveiled tapestry of history. As the tranquil waves of resolution from that Boston estate gathering receded into the quiet harbors of memory, William James found himself navigating the twilight years of his illustrious career with a renewed sense of purpose, his heart's intermittent pains serving as gentle reminders of mortality's shadow. Much like the ancient Stoics who viewed ailments as pragmatic tests of resilience, drawing from Epictetus's teachings on enduring what one must while shaping what one can. Influences that subtly permeated James's pluralism through the empirical lens he honed at, where by 1900 he had returned to his professorial duties, lecturing on the varieties of human experience with a depth enriched by his veiled encounters. Encounters that echoed the esoteric pursuits he had embraced since joining the Theosophical Society in 1882, a society blending Eastern mysticism with Western inquiry, where secret doctrines whispered of hidden knowledge akin to the artifacts he had shattered, knowledge that James approached not as dogma, but as testable hypotheses in the laboratory of life. Picture the scene in soft, amber lamplight filtering through his study, windows overlooking the Charles River, where stacks of correspondence from around the world piled like autumn leaves, letters from mediums and mystics he had befriended through the American Society for Psychical Research, which he co-founded in 1884 and served as president, delving into phenomena like telepathy and apparitions with scientific rigor, yet open to the possibility of souls persisting beyond the veil. A possibility he explored in sessions with the renowned medium Piper, whose trance utterances revealed intimate details of his family's past, details he initially suspected arose from subtle cues or servant gossip, but which gradually convinced him of a telepathic undercurrent in consciousness, a stream that flowed not just within individuals but between them, linking minds across distances like the ancient oracles of Delphi who channeled pragmatic truths from the gods to guide earthly affairs. Yet beneath this scholarly facade lay a deeper mystery, one unearthed from his private diaries, where he chronicled experiments with nitrous oxide as early as 1875, inhaling the gas to induce metaphysical illuminations that allowed him to grasp the dialectical flux of in ways his waking mind resisted. Visions of a universe pulsating with interconnected experiences, much as the ancient Pythagoreans saw numbers as the pragmatic essence binding cosmos and soul. An influence filtered through his father's Swedenborgian theology, which posited spiritual correspondences between the material and ethereal realms, correspondences James tested in his own radical empiricism, arguing that relations themselves were as real as the things they connected, a forgotten thread weaving back to Heraclitus's eternal flux, where everything flows and nothing abides, mirroring the pragmatic evolution of truth through practical consequences rather than static ideals. As the narrative drifts onward like a serene fog over New England's rolling hills, we uncover the rising intrigue of James's 1896 encounter with peyote, a mezcal button sent anonymously perhaps by remnants of the echoes of eternity or inspired by Native American rituals he had glimpsed in his Southwest journeys, ingesting it in solitude to explore altered states, the visions unfolding as a kaleidoscope of ancient wisdoms. From the mysteries where initiates drank to behold divine pragmatism in action, beliefs by their transformative effects on life, to the shamanic trances of Siberian tribes, where consciousness streamed into collective realms, revealing to James that mysticism wasn't escapism but a practical tool for vitality. infusing his lectures in Edinburgh from 1901 to 1902, where he delivered the material for the varieties of religious experience. Drawing on over 400 personal accounts of conversions, saintly lives, and mind cures, emphasizing the fruits of faith over its roots, a pragmatic criterion echoing Aristotle's, where virtue's truth lay in its promotion of human flourishing, yet twisted with a plot revelation when a letter arrived from, now deep in the deciphering Mayan codices that depicted cosmic cycles as streams of divine consciousness, warning of a resurgent antagonist. A European occultist claiming descent from Rosicrucian alchemists, who sought to monopolize these experiential insights for elitist ends, prompting James to travel incognito to London in 1905, under the guise of lecturing at Oxford, where he infiltrated a secret gathering of the British Society for Psychical Research, of which he had been president in 1894-1895, confronting the occultist in a dimly lit chamber adorned with alchemical symbols. Their debate climaxing in a ritual of shared nitrous oxide inhalation, where visions clashed like thunder over the Thames, James's pluralistic universe prevailing over the monistic tyranny, shattering the antagonist's crystal orb and affirming that truth's multiplicity, like the ancient atomist's swirling voids, allowed for endless practical adaptations. In the soothing, as James sailed back across the Atlantic, his cardiac whispers growing fainter, he penned a pluralistic universe in 1909, weaving these hidden threads into a tapestry that rejected absolute idealism for a world of each form realities, influenced subtly by vitalism and the ancient Tao's flowing way, where pragmatism harmonized with nature's ceaseless change, his final years marked by anti-imperialist advocacy against the Philippine annexation. A pragmatic stand for ethical consequences over power, until his passing in 1910 at New Hampshire, leaving a legacy that ripples through modern mindfulness, existential therapy, and even quantum interpretations, where observation pragmatically shapes outcomes, inviting us to surrender to the gentle current of discovery, drifting into restful awareness of the interconnected mysteries that span from ancient sages to our own unspoken depths. As the gentle currents of James's later reflections carried him through the autumnal landscapes of New Hampshire, where the rustling leaves seemed to murmur forgotten incantations from his nitrous oxide visions, he often retreated to his summer home inn, a sanctuary nestled amid granite peaks and whispering pines, a place where the boundaries between philosophy and personal healing blurred like mist on a mountain lake, for it was here in the seclusion of nature's embrace that James grappled with the hidden torments of his inner life, torments that had plagued him since his youth, when bouts of profound depression and neurasthenia confined him to the shadows of his family's New York home, leading to a crisis in 1869 where suicidal thoughts loomed like storm clouds over his medical studies, only to be pierced by a ray of volitional light upon reading Charles' treatise on free will, prompting James to declare his first act of freedom as choosing to believe in free will itself, a pragmatic leap that transformed despair into dynamic energy, echoing the ancient Stoics like Epictetus, who tested inner freedom against life's adversities, a personal mystery he rarely disclosed publicly, but which infused his writings with an undercurrent of hope, proving that even the psyche's darkest streams could be navigated toward fruitful shores. Yet this veil of vulnerability lifted further in his clandestine pursuits with the American Society for Psychical Research, where as president from 1894 to 1895, he delved into the enigmatic world of mediums and apparitions, not as a gullible seeker, but as a radical empiricist open to experiences beyond the material, experiences like those with Piper, whose trance revelations uncannily detailed his deceased relatives' lives. Initially suspected as fraud or subconscious cues, yet gradually accepted as evidence of a subliminal self or telepathic connections, links that harkened back to ancient Mesopotamian dream oracles, where priests pragmatically interpreted visions for communal guidance. A hidden thread in James's work that challenged the scientific orthodoxy of his era, building subtle tension as critics accused him of credulity, while he defended the pragmatic value of exploring the more in human consciousness. That unseen spiritual order he posited in his philosophy, an order glimpsed in his own experiments with nitrous oxide and chloroform, where altered states revealed a pulsating universe of relations, much as the Pythagoreans divined harmony in numerical fluxes, visions that twisted the narrative when an anonymous correspondent from the Theosophical Society, which he had joined in the 1880s under the influence of Helena esoteric syntheses of Eastern and Western wisdoms, sent him a parcel containing a rare Tibetan manuscript fragment, purportedly describing meditative techniques to access the records, eternal streams of collective thought, prompting James to attempt these practices in quiet dawns, his heart's irregular rhythms syncing with the rhythmic chants, leading to a visionary climax where he perceived the interconnectedness of all experiences, from his anti-imperialist campaigns against the U.S. annexation of the Philippines in 1899, where he pragmatically argued that forcing democracy contradicted its ethical fruits, to the ancient Vedic sages who viewed karma as practical consequences shaping rebirth, a revelation that fortified his pluralism against the absolute monisms of his contemporaries, shattering illusions of a singular truth in favor of a multiverse of perspectives, each by its vitality in lived action. In the calming aftermath, as James's health waned toward his final days in 1910, surrounded by family and the serene echoes of his mountain retreat, these hidden explorations coalesced into a legacy of boundless curiosity, influencing not just psychology's functionalist turn, but the broader American spirit of innovation, from progressive education to contemporary positive psychology, where personal narratives of resilience mirror his own unspoken triumphs, inviting us to float gently on the stream of our own discoveries, surrendering to the soothing mysteries that connect the veiled past to the unfolding present. As the whispers of pines faded into the soft veil of evening, William James often found himself reflecting on the intricate web of his family's legacy, a legacy that stretched back to his birth in 1842 as the eldest of 5 children in a bustling New York household, where his father, Henry James, a theologian of unorthodox Swedenborgian bent, instilled in him a profound curiosity for the spiritual dimensions of existence, dimensions that young William absorbed alongside his brother Henry, the future novelist whose literary streams would parallel William's philosophical flows, yet diverge in their intimate explorations of human character, a sibling bond laced with subtle rivalries and shared intellectual adventures, including travels across Europe where the family sought cures for various ailments and inspirations from the old world's thinkers, from the misty shores of England to the scholarly enclaves of Germany, where William's blue eyes, set in a face of slight to medium build, gazed upon the works of and igniting sparks that would later blaze into his psychological innovations, though not without the shadows of his less than robust constitution, plagued by eye strains, back pains, and a nervous temperament that confined him to periods of invalidism, hidden struggles that he masked with a determination forged in the crucible of self-overcoming, much like the ancient Greek Stoics who viewed personal afflictions as pragmatic arenas for cultivating virtue, a lesser-known aspect of his youth where art beckoned as a potential vocation, with sketches and paintings revealing a sensitive soul attuned to the visual poetry of landscapes, only to pivot toward medicine in 1864, interrupted by an ill-fated expedition to the Amazon with Louis in 1865, where the humid jungles and relentless insects tested his endurance, yielding not just specimens of exotic fish, but introspective revelations on adaptation and survival, echoes of Darwinian pragmatism that would infuse his later dismissal of absolute truths in favor of those by their adaptive fruits in the wilds of experience. Yet beneath these documented voyages lay a veiled mystery, one hinted at in fragmented letters discovered in a forgotten archive at the library, suggesting that during his Amazon sojourn, James encountered indigenous shamans along the Negro, their ayahuasca rituals inducing visions of a collective consciousness stream, where individual thoughts merged like tributaries into a vast mental river, a forbidden encounter he kept secret for fear of academic scorn, but which planted seeds for his radical empiricism, arguing that pure experience encompassed not just sensory data but relational fluxes, akin to the Amazon's ever-shifting waters, a discovery that deepened his inner turmoil upon returning, culminating in a profound crisis from 1867 to 1870, when depression's dark eddies threatened to engulf him, visions of a deterministic universe clashing with his yearning for free will. Until a pivotal reading of French philosopher Charles in April 1870, whose essays on volition prompted James to make his first act of free will, by choosing to believe in free will itself, a pragmatic resolution that lifted the veil of despair, transforming potential suicide into a lifelong affirmation of agency, much as ancient Epicureans swerved from fatalism through the of atoms, a personal plot twist that propelled him toward completing his MD in 1869. Though he never practiced medicine, instead accepting a position as instructor in physiology in 1872, where his lectures evolved from anatomical dissections to explorations of the mind's inner anatomy, laying the groundwork for the principles of psychology. A monumental work gestated over 12 years and published in 1890, where he famously described consciousness as a stream, not a chain of static states, but a continuous flow teeming with fringes and transitions. Illustrated with metaphors drawn from his hidden shamanic visions, like the flight of a bird alternating between perching and soaring, a concept that challenged the atomistic psychologies of his time and resonated with forgotten Buddhist texts on the impermanence of mind moments, texts he may have encountered through theosophical channels in the 1880s. As the narrative meanders through these unexplored tributaries, we sense the building intrigue in James's marriage to Alice in 1878, a union that anchored his restless spirit, her steady presence a counterpoint to his health's vicissitudes, including the tragic loss of their infant son Herman in 1884 to whooping cough, a grief that drove him deeper into psychical research, seeking solace in and mediums like Piper, whose uncanny communications with the departed convinced him of survival after death, at least provisionally, as he pragmatically weighed evidence against emotional need, a quest that intertwined with his founding of the American Society for Psychical Research in 1884, where investigations into telepathy and apparitions revealed lesser-known cases, such as the will, affair he analyzed posthumously through colleagues, where a deceased farmer's ghost directed his son to a hidden will. Testing the boundaries of empirical proof, yet James's skepticism tempered his enthusiasm, viewing such phenomena as extensions of the subliminal self, a reservoir beneath consciousness's surface stream, echoing Plato's cave shadows but pragmatically evaluated by their life-enhancing effects, a tension that climaxed in his 1896 presidential address to the Society, where he defended the study of anomalies against scientific ridicule, arguing that ignoring them stifled discovery. Much as Galileo's telescope had unveiled celestial mysteries, and in this vein, his experiments with nitrous oxide, begun in the 1870s under the influence of Benjamin Blood's pamphlet on the Revelation, induced states where he glimpsed the reconciliation of opposites, scribbling frantic notes like, "A woman is monogamous. Man is polygamous," humorous yet profound glimpses into the non-rational undercurrents of thought, visions that informed his critique of Hegelian absolutism, favoring instead a pluralistic universe where truths coexisted like diverse ecosystems. A philosophy fully articulated in his 1907 Pragmatism lectures at Lowell Institute, where he posited that ideas become true insofar as they help us navigate experience satisfactorily. Drawing subtle parallels to ancient sophists like, who declared man the measure of all things, a measure James applied to religion in his 1902 lectures, published as The Varieties of Religious Experience, cataloging saintly lives, conversions, and mystic states from diverse traditions, emphasizing their pragmatic fruits, moral vigor, emotional depth, over doctrinal origins, including lesser-known accounts of mind cures and new thought movements, where belief's power healed bodies and spirits. Akin to shamanic healings he had witnessed in disguise during a secretive 1890 trip to the American West, mingling with Navajo medicine men whose sand paintings channeled consciousness streams for communal harmony, a hidden inspiration that added layers to his assertion that religion's validity lay in its vital consequences, not metaphysical proofs. Yet the mystery deepened in his later years, as cardiac troubles mounted, leading to a 1906 sojourn in Europe for rest, where he encountered in Paris, whose vital resonated with James's vitalism, sparking correspondences on intuition's role in grasping reality's flux, a flux he contrasted with Bradley's absolute idealism in a pluralistic universe, delivered as lectures at Oxford in 1908, advocating a world of each forms, interconnected yet irreducible. Much as quantum pioneers would later describe entangled particles, though James knew nothing of them, his insights presciently echoing ancient harmonies of yin and yang. And amid these intellectual heights, personal shadows lingered, including his anti-imperialist activism through the Anti-Imperialist League, protesting the Philippine-American War as a betrayal of democratic pragmatism, where coercive empire yielded bitter fruits of resentment. A stance that alienated some colleagues but affirmed his ethical consistency, culminating in his final work, The Meaning of Truth in 1909, defending pragmatism against critics who misunderstood it as mere expediency rather than experiential verification. And as his health faltered, retreating once more to, where on August 26, 1910, surrounded by Alice and loved ones, he passed peacefully, his last words a serene farewell. Leaving a legacy that permeated American thought, from Dewey's progressive education to contemporary cognitive therapies, where mindfulness streams draw from his psychological insights, inviting us to immerse in the gentle flow of our own hidden histories, drifting toward restful revelations in the unveiled echoes of time. As the serene reflections on William James's final days lingered like the last notes of a fading melody over New Hampshire's granite hills, one cannot overlook the intricate familial threads that wove through his life, threads that connected him not only to his philosophical pursuits, but to a brother whose literary genius cast its own luminous shadow across the American intellectual landscape. For Henry James, born just 15 months after William in 1843, emerged as a novelist of profound psychological depth, crafting tales like The Portrait of a Lady and The Golden Bowl that delved into the subtleties of human consciousness, with an artistry that mirrored yet contrasted William's scientific explorations. A sibling dynamic marked by mutual respect, yet tempered by temperamental divergences, where William's moral seriousness and purposeful drive clashed gently with Henry's puckish humor and aesthetic detachment. Their correspondence sparse and often focused on mundane family matters, the health of their parents, the antics of siblings Alice, Garth Wilkinson, and rather than deep dissections of each other's works, though glimpses of critique surfaced in rare letters, such as William's 1905 missive to Henry about the Golden Bowl, where he confessed puzzlement at its elaborate narration and treatment of adultery, urging a more vigorous and decisive style free from twilight mustiness. While acknowledging its unique social atmosphere, a veiled mystery in their bond suggesting underlying tensions, for Henry's responses, like his 1907 apology for delaying feedback on pragmatism, revealed a professed overwhelm and unconscious alignment with its principles, and later in 1909, praise for a pluralistic universe with thrilled pride and near comprehension, subtly implying philosophy's limited allure compared to fiction's immersive worlds. A dynamic further complicated by their shared adoration for Sister Alice, whose brilliant diary entries and invalidism drew them closer, hinting that the family's intellectual intensity strained the brothers' direct engagement, with William anchoring himself at a mid-American pragmatism's birth, while Henry expatriated to Europe's literary salons, forging paths that intersected only in the hidden undercurrents of influence. Where Henry's novels often portrayed pragmatic villains manipulating innocence, perhaps an unwitting counterpoint to William's philosophy of practical consequences, yet without overt conflict, their liberal minds harmonizing in unspoken ways, much like the ancient Roman brothers, whose reforms echoed across generations without direct collaboration. Flowing from these familial enigmas, we drift into the lesser-explored realms of James's experimental audacity, where his fascination with altered states of consciousness led him to ingest nitrous oxide as early as the 1870s, inspired by Benjamin Blood's pamphlet on the Revelation, inhaling the gas in controlled settings to unlock metaphysical insights, revelations that allowed him to grasp the dialectical intricacies of philosophy in ways his sober mind resisted. Scribbling frantic, humorous notes like, "Woman is monogamous," "Man is polygamous," epigrams that captured the non-rational fluxes beneath rational thought, fluxes akin to the Pythagorean harmonies of numbers binding cosmos and soul, a hidden pursuit that informed his critique of absolute idealism, favoring a pluralistic universe where opposites reconciled in experiential streams, and extending to other substances like chloroform and even peyote in later years, drawing from Native American rituals he encountered indirectly through correspondence. These experiments not mere indulgences but pragmatic tests of the mind's boundaries, echoing the initiates who partook of to behold divine truths by transformative effects, a mystery deepened by his involvement in the Theosophical Society, where Hellenist's esoteric blends of Eastern mysticism and Western science captivated him, prompting explorations of Tibetan meditative techniques to access records, eternal repositories of collective consciousness. Visions that blurred the lines between psychology and the occult, building subtle tension as academic peers whispered of his credulity. Yet James defended these inquiries as extensions of radical empiricism, where relations and pure experiences encompassed the more beyond material senses, a conviction fortified by his lifelong battle with depression and ill health, ailments rooted perhaps in inherited physiological weaknesses or the weight of his father's theological radicalism. Crises that peaked in his 20s with suicidal ideations amid a deterministic worldview, only resolved through volitional philosophy, a personal climax where choosing belief in free will became his salvation, much as ancient Epicureans swerved from fate via atomic, infusing his work with hope's pragmatic fruits, and weaving into his lesser-known fascination with mysticism, as explored in unearthed writings like his notes on exploring unseen worlds, where he delved into the philosophy of mysticism not as escapism, but as vital enhancement, probing tacit dimensions of religious experience beyond doctrinal confines, dimensions that linked his Amazon expedition's shamanic encounters, where ayahuasca visions of merging thought streams planted seeds for his stream of consciousness to European sojourns in search of health, including a 1906 meeting within Paris, whose vital resonated with James's vitalism, sparking dialogues on intuition's grasp of reality's ceaseless change, a change he contrasted with monistic tyrannies in his lectures, advocating a world of interconnected yet irreducible, each forms, presciently mirroring quantum entanglements unknown to him, yet echoing yin-yang harmonies from antiquity. And amid these intellectual voyages, his anti-imperialist fervor burned quietly, protesting the Philippine annexation through leagues and essays, arguing that imperial coercion yielded ethical poisons rather than democratic blooms, a stance that alienated allies but affirmed his consistency, much like civil disobedience against expansionist wars. And as health's shadows lengthened in his 60s, with cardiac whispers and European rests, James channeled these veiled adventures into final essays like The Meaning of Truth, rebutting critics with gentle firmness. His passing in 1910 not an end, but a dissolution into the pluralistic tapestry he championed, rippling through Dewey's education, modern therapy's mindfulness, and even psychedelic research's revival, where altered states test pragmatic truths anew, inviting us to surrender to the soothing currents of our own unexplored depths, where mysteries unfold in eternal, restful waves. As the tranquil veil of twilight descended once more over the rugged contours of landscape, where the ancient granite peaks stood sentinel like guardians of forgotten epochs, William James, in the waning light of his 68th year, found himself drawn inexorably toward the horizon of his mortal journey, a journey that had traversed not only the vast terrains of American academia, but the shadowy realms of the psyche and the spirit. Realms where pragmatic truths intertwined with the enigmatic whispers of antiquity, much as the roots of the surrounding pines delved deep into soil layered with the detritus of prehistoric forests. And it was here, in this secluded haven he had cherished since acquiring the property in the 1880s as a retreat from bustling halls, that the threads of his life began to converge in a final, poignant tapestry. Woven with the quiet intensity of a man who had long pondered the practical consequences of existence, from the fluid streams of consciousness he had charted in his seminal works to the veiled mysteries of immortality he pursued through psychical research, pursuits that now, in the summer of 1910, took on an intimate urgency as his heart, weakened by years of strain and the rigors of transatlantic travels, faltered under the weight of angina, a condition that had plagued him since the early 1900s, prompting repeated sojourns to Europe in search of restorative climates, only to return from his last such voyage in June of that year, aboard the RMS Kaiser with his devoted wife Alice by his side, her steadfast presence a pragmatic anchor amid the swells of his declining health. For Alice, whom he had wed in 1878 after a courtship marked by mutual intellectual affinity and her own resilient spirit, had become the quiet architect of his domestic sanctuary, bearing witness to his triumphs and torments alike, including the hidden expeditions into esoteric societies and the nocturnal experiments with altered states that had illuminated his philosophies, yet exacted their toll on his fragile constitution. As the days of August unfolded like the slow turning of yellowed manuscript pages, James confined himself to the simple wooden house overlooking the lake, where the air carried the scent of wildflowers, and the distant calls of loons echoed like spectral voices from the Anasazi canyons he had once explored in secrecy, his bed a vantage point from which he surveyed the culmination of his ideas, dictating final revisions to his unfinished manuscripts, including essays on radical empiricism that subtly nodded to the collective consciousness he had glimpsed in peyote visions and theosophical meditations, visions that now resurfaced in feverish dreams, blending the practical ethics of his anti-imperialist writings, where he decried the Philippine conquest as a betrayal of America's moral fruits, with the ancient Stoic acceptance of fate. For in conversations with Alice, he confided that death has come to seem a very trifling incident, a pragmatic reframing of mortality as merely another transition in the stream of experience, much like the rites where initiates embraced dissolution as rebirth, a sentiment that masked the underlying grief from past losses, the infant son Herman's death in 1884 that had propelled him deeper into spiritualism, or the earlier passing of his parents and siblings, losses that had forged his belief in the more beyond the veil. A belief tested in the quiet hours as his family gathered around him. His brother Henry, the expatriate novelist whose intricate tales of moral ambiguity complemented William's philosophical quests, arriving from England to stand vigil, alongside sons Henry, William, Billy, and Alexander Francis Tweedy, and daughter Mary, Peggy, whose devoted care in his final months echoed the unsung roles of women in the family's intellectual saga, a saga laced with hidden tensions. For as James's strength ebbed, whispers of unresolved mysteries lingered like the cryptic letters from, now faded into archival obscurity, hinting at lingering artifacts from their shared adventures. Artifacts that James, in a final act of volition, instructed to be burned, preserving the enigma for future seekers rather than exposing it to skeptical scrutiny. And so, on the afternoon of August 26, 1910, as sunlight filtered through the curtains in golden shafts, casting patterns reminiscent of the petroglyphs he had deciphered in youthful secrecy, James slipped into unconsciousness, discovered by Alice who, with tender resolve, climbed into the bed to cradle him in her arms, her embrace a final pragmatic affirmation of love's enduring consequences, and in those fleeting moments of returning awareness amid the gathered kin, he uttered words laced with quiet wonder and perhaps a glimpse of the beyond, turning to Alice with, "There is my Mary," a reference shrouded in familial intimacy, evoking his daughter Mary or perhaps a visionary echo of his mother Mary James, long departed yet ever present in the stream of memory. And then to his sons, "I have such boys," a fragmented benediction that overlooked his daughter in its utterance yet encompassed the pride of legacy, words that hung in the air like the last notes of a symphony, filled with the mystery of what lay unspoken, for no grand philosophical summation escaped his lips, no recapitulation of pragmatism's tenets or pluralism's embrace, but rather a personal human affirmation, pragmatic in its simplicity, as his breathing grew shallow, ceasing 3 hours later in the embrace of those he cherished. His passing not a dramatic climax, but a gentle dissolution into the pluralistic universe he had championed, where death was but one relation among many, rippling outward to influence generations, from the functional psychologists who built upon his stream of thought to the modern existentialists who echoed his will to believe, leaving behind a world enriched by his hidden discoveries, a world where the echoes of ancient truths continued to flow through the practical currents of everyday life. Inviting all who ponder his story to drift into contemplative rest, secure in the knowledge that endings are merely gateways to untold continuations. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Thank you and see you.